The snow fell silent and thick on Christmas night, 1885. Jacob Thornton walked his land alone, lanterns swinging golden against the Montana dark. He'd done this every evening for 5 years, checking stock, securing gates, returning to an empty cabin. The cold bit through his coat, made his breath smoke white. Tonight felt different somehow, heavier, the world wrapped in crystalline quiet. He approached the barn, boots crunching through knee-deep drifts. The door stood slightly ajar. Jacob frowned. He'd closed it himself at sunset. Wind. Maybe. Or a curious deer pushing through. Inside. Frost coated every surface like glass. His breath hung visible in the lantern glow. The horses stamped in their stalls, restless. Then he heard a sound that didn't belong. Weak. Barely there. A baby's cry. Jacob's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He raised the lantern, following the sound. The hayloft. Something was in the hayloft. He climbed the ladder with careful urgency, old wood creaking under his weight. The cry came again, thin and desperate. At the top, he swung the lantern wide. What he saw stopped his breath. A young woman lay curled in the loose hay, her body wrapped around an infant. Both wore inadequate clothing for the killing cold. The woman's lips were pale blue, her dark hair dusted with frost. The baby, so small, wrapped in a thin blanket, had skin like porcelain, too white, too still. They were freezing to death in his barn. "Jesus!" Jacob whispered. He set the lantern down, moved fast. The woman didn't stir when he touched her shoulder. Her skin felt like winter itself. The baby whimpered, a sound so weak it barely carried. No time for questions. No time for anything but action. Jacob shrugged out of his heavy coat, wrapped it around them both. The woman was lighter than she should be, too thin, her body barely warm against his chest. He cradled the baby close with one arm, felt the flutter of a heartbeat against his ribs. Still alive. Both still alive. He descended the ladder with aching slowness, each step measured, careful. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder. The baby made small sounds, breath shallow and quick. Across the frozen yard, through the cabin door, inside. The fire had burned low, just embers in the hearth. Jacob laid them on the rug near the fireplace, his hands already moving to build up the flames. Kindling first, then split logs. The fire caught, grew, threw heat and golden light across their pale faces. He knelt beside them, removed their wet outer layers with respectful efficiency. The woman's dress was torn at the hem, her boots worn through. The baby's blanket was damp from melted snow. Neither had gloves or proper winter gear. Who were they? Where had they come from? Questions for later. Right now. They needed warmth. They needed to live. Jacob worked through the night with quiet competence. Warm water, not hot. That would be dangerous applied carefully to their hands and feet. Blankets from his own bed. The baby he wrapped in wool and flannel, held close to his chest to share body heat. She was a girl. He realized, perhaps 6 months old. Her tiny fingers were mottled, circulation returning slowly. The woman stirred near dawn. Her eyes fluttered open, dark eyes, wide with sudden terror. "Please," she whispered, voice raw and cracked. "Please don't hurt us." Jacob gentled his tone, kept his movements slow. "You're safe now, ma'am. Just warming you up. You were in my barn, nearly frozen through." She tried to sit. Couldn't. Her gaze found the baby in his arms. "Emma. She's here. She's warming up, too. Can you drink something?" He brought her broth he'd heated, supported her shoulders as she drank. Her hands shook, but color was returning to her lips. The baby Emma began to fuss. A stronger sound now. Hungry. Alive. "My name is Sarah," the woman managed. "Sarah Mitchell. We were... we got lost. Where were you headed? Oregon, my sister. The wagon train left us behind when I fell ill. We've been walking for 2 days. Jacob's jaw tightened. 2 days in this cold. With a baby. It was a miracle they'd survived this long. You're safe now, he said again. Rest. We'll talk when you're stronger. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She reached out, touched Emma's small head. The baby's eyes were closed now, breathing steady against Jacob's chest. Thank you, Sarah whispered. Thank you. Jacob nodded, throat too tight for words. He fed Emma warmed milk from a cloth, patient and careful. She drank greedily, her tiny body relaxing as warmth and food filled her. Outside, the first light of Christmas morning touched the snow. Inside, 2 lives hung in the balance, and Jacob Thornton, who'd been alone so long he'd forgotten what purpose felt like, held them both in his weathered hands. Sarah woke to firelight and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it came back, the terrible cold. The barn, the rancher's weathered face above her. She sat up carefully. Her body ached, but the deadly chill had receded. Emma lay beside her in a nest of blankets, sleeping peacefully. Sarah's eyes stung with tears of relief. The rancher sat at a rough wooden table, watching her. In daylight or what passed for it through frosted windows, she could see him better. Maybe 40, maybe older. Tall and lean, with gray threading through dark hair. His face was weathered but kind. Lines deep around eyes that had seen hard things. How do you feel? He asked. Better? Warm? Sarah's voice came out stronger now. She touched Emma's forehead, normal temperature. Is she? She's fine. Fed her twice in the night. She's a good baby. Quiet. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude so intense it hurt. This stranger had saved them. Had sat up all night tending them both. She didn't even know his name. I'm Sarah Mitchell, she said. This is Emma, my daughter. Jacob Thornton, this is my land. I'm so sorry we intruded. I was looking for shelter, just for the night. I must have fallen asleep. I didn't think. Don't apologize. Jacob's voice was firm but gentle. You're lucky I found you when I did. Another hour. Maybe less. He didn't finish. Sarah looked down at Emma, felt the weight of how close they'd come. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed. Any decent man would do the same. But Sarah had learned, in her short and difficult life, that decent men were rarer than people claimed. This one had carried them through a frozen night, had cared for her daughter with capable hands, had asked nothing in return. Jacob stood, poured coffee into a tin cup. Can you eat? I've got eggs. Bread from last week. Still good. I don't want to take your food. I'm offering it. He met her eyes. You need strength. The baby needs you strong. Sarah nodded, accepted the coffee. It was hot and bitter and wonderful. Jacob cooked at the stove a simple bachelor's meal, but prepared with care. Scrambled eggs, thick slices of bread toasted on the iron. He served her first. Watched to make sure she ate. You said you were headed to Oregon, he said after a while. Your sister's there. Yes, in Portland. She married a merchant last year. Said there was room for us if... Sarah's voice trailed off. If what? If I could get there. She sent the letter 6 months ago, before Emma was born. Jacob was quiet, stirring his own eggs. The father, dead. Fever took him before he knew I was with child. Sarah said it flatly, without emotion. She'd cried all her tears for Thomas last winter. Now she just needed to survive. I joined a wagon train in Kansas. But when I got sick, when Emma ran a fever, they said they couldn't wait. Left us at a trading post with promises someone else would come through. No one came. No one came. Sarah looked at her daughter, sleeping so peacefully now. We waited 3 weeks. I used what money I had for room and board when it ran out. The owner said we had to leave. So we walked. I thought maybe I'd find a town, another train, something. Jacob's expression darkened. You walked through winter with a baby. What choice did I have? He had no answer for that. What choice did desperate people ever have? How far did you get? He asked. I don't know. I lost track of the days when the snow started falling. I just looked for shelter. I saw your barn. Emma stirred, made small sounds. Sarah lifted her, began to nurse. Jacob turned his back politely, gave them privacy. When he looked again, both mother and child seemed more settled, more real somehow. You can stay here, Jacob said, until you're strong enough to travel, however long that takes. Sarah's head snapped up. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. It's winter. You've got a baby. Where else would you go? I have no money to pay you. I'm not asking for money. Jacob's voice was quiet but certain. I'm offering shelter. Christian charity. If you need to call it something, no strings, no expectations. Just a warm place until spring. Sarah studied his face, looking for deceit, for hidden motives. She found only tired honesty. This man had been alone a long time. She could see it in the way he moved through the cabin, in the sparse furniture, in the absence of any softness or comfort. Why? She asked softly. Jacob looked away, into the fire. Because it's Christmas. Because you need help. Because. He stopped, shook his head. Does it matter why? I suppose not. Sarah held Emma closer. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. Jacob. Jacob. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and thick. Inside, warmth held. Two strangers and a baby, brought together by desperation and mercy. Sarah didn't know what came next. But for now, for this moment, they were safe. That was enough. Jacob sat alone after Sarah and Emma fell back asleep. The cabin felt different. There was breathing in it besides his own. The sound of another life. 2 other lives, sharing his space. He should have felt intruded upon. He'd built this solitude carefully. Brick by brick. Year by year. Instead, he felt something else. Something he couldn't name yet. His coffee had gone cold. He didn't drink it. The closed door on the far wall caught his eye, as it always did. The nursery. He hadn't opened it in 5 years. Hadn't been able to. Inside was Mary's rocking chair, the cradle he'd built with his own hands. Tiny clothes folded and waiting for a baby who never drew breath. Mary had died giving birth to their son. The boy lived for 3 hours, long enough for Jacob to hold him, to count his fingers, to watch the light fade from eyes that had barely opened. They were buried together in the plot behind the house, under the cottonwood tree. Jacob visited their graves every Sunday. After, he'd closed the nursery door, locked it, threw himself into work, into making the ranch profitable, into anything that kept him moving forward. He'd spoken to almost no one for 5 years except hired hands and the man at the general store in town. He'd built walls around his heart so thick that nothing could get through. Nothing until tonight. He looked at the sleeping woman and child. Sarah was younger than Mary had been. Maybe 23. Emma couldn't be more than 6 months, the same age his son would have been, if he'd lived. Was that why he'd brought them inside without hesitation? Was that why his hands had known exactly how to warm a baby, how to feed her, how to hold her close? Mary's voice came to him in memory, clear as if she stood beside him. You've got too much heart to waste it on being alone. Jacob. She'd said that once, years before they married. He'd been helping a neighbor rebuild after a barn fire, working sunrise to sunset without pay. Mary had brought him lunch, watched him work, said those words with that smile that lit up her whole face. Some men are meant to build, she'd said, and some are meant to care. You're both. Jacob Thornton. Don't ever forget it. But he had forgotten, or tried to. Caring meant losing. Building meant watching things fall apart. Love meant graves under cottonwood trees. He stood, moved to the window. Dawn was breaking, pale pink across endless white. The snow had stopped. The world looked clean and new, like God had wiped the slate. Jacob thought about finding them in the barn, about how close he'd come to making his rounds an hour later. After finishing the ledger work he'd put off, about how easily he might have discovered them frozen solid in the morning. It wasn't coincidence. He didn't believe in coincidence anymore. Not on Christmas. Not like this. He'd saved them because he had to. Because leaving them would have killed something in him worse than grief ever had. Because Mary's voice in his head said, "This is why you're still here. Jacob, this is your purpose." The decision formed without conscious thought. They would stay. Not just until Sarah was strong enough to travel. As long as they needed a week, a month, the whole winter. Whatever it took to see them safe, fed, warm, to see Emma grow stronger, to see Sarah smile. He owed them nothing. They owed him nothing. But something larger than debt was at work here. Something like redemption. Like a second chance neither of them had asked for, but both desperately needed. Jacob added wood to the fire, watched it catch and grow. Heat filled the cabin, drove back the cold. Emma made a small sound in her sleep, settled deeper into blankets. Sarah's face, in rest, looked peaceful, young, unburdened. He would give them that, at least a season of peace, a place to breathe without running. Outside, the sun climbed higher. Christmas morning spread gold across the snow. Jacob poured fresh coffee, stood at the window watching light transform his land. The cottonwood tree stood dark against white, his wife and son resting beneath. "I'm trying, Mary," he whispered. "I'm trying to remember how—" The door to the nursery remained closed. But for the first time in 5 years, Jacob thought he might someday. Maybe be able to open it. Not today. But someday, it was a start. Days fell into rhythm. Sarah's strength returned gradually, color rising in her cheeks. Emma thrived, growing plumper and more alert. The cabin adjusted around them, made space for their presence. Jacob woke before dawn as always, fed the horses and checked the stock. When he returned, Sarah was usually up, working at something despite his protests. She couldn't sit idle. She said it wasn't in her nature. She washed dishes, folded blankets, swept the floor. Small contributions that meant everything to her dignity. Jacob understood. He'd felt useless once. After Mary died, working had been the only thing that kept him sane. "You don't have to," he said one morning, finding her kneading bread dough. "I want to." Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency. "You've given us so much. Let me give something back." "You're recovering. You need rest." "I've rested for a week. I'm fine now." She shaped the dough, set it near the stove to rise. "Besides, when's the last time you had fresh bread?" Jacob couldn't remember. He'd been living on hardtack and whatever was easiest. "Fair point." Sarah smiled, and something in his chest shifted. It was a real smile, unguarded. The first he'd seen from her, Emma sat on a blanket by the fire, playing with a wooden rattle Jacob had carved from scrap pine. He'd worked on it by lamplight, hands remembering skills he thought forgotten. When he'd given it to Sarah, she'd held it like it was gold. "She loves it," Sarah said now, watching Emma shake the rattle with delight. "She sleeps with it every night." It's just wood. It's kindness. That's worth more than wood. Evenings, They talked. Small things at first: the weather, the ranch, safe topics, but gradually deeper. Sarah spoke of her childhood in Missouri, her parents dead from cholera, marrying Thomas because he was kind and she had nowhere else to go. Thomas dying before he knew about Emma. The loneliness of early motherhood with no family, no support. Jacob listened more than he spoke. But sometimes, late at night with the fire burning low, he shared fragments. His father teaching him ranching, building this cabin with his own hands. Mary's laughter, her garden in summer, how she'd made everything feel like home. He didn't mention the nursery, didn't mention the graves. Sarah saw them anyway. She was too observant not to notice the closed door, the distant sadness in his eyes. But she didn't ask. She understood that some doors opened in their own time. One evening, Emma grew fussy. Sarah had been up the night before when the baby was teething, and exhaustion showed in her face. Jacob took Emma without thinking, walked her around the cabin, humming low and tuneless. Emma settled against his shoulder, her small body warm and trusting. Her breathing slowed, deepened, asleep in minutes, when Jacob looked up. Sarah was watching with tears on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice quiet to not wake the baby. "Nothing's wrong." Sarah wiped her eyes. "She trusts you. Emma doesn't trust easily. After we were left behind, after so many strangers were unkind, she stopped letting anyone but me hold her. But you—" She shook her head. "She knows you're good." Jacob looked down at the sleeping infant. Her tiny hand curled against his shirt. Her breath was warm on his neck. Something fierce and protective surged through him. "She's a good baby," he managed. "She is. Thanks to you." Sarah's voice was soft. "I don't know what we would have done if you hadn't found us. Someone would have helped. Maybe, but you did. You opened your home, your life. You didn't have to." Jacob met her eyes across the firelit cabin. "Yes, I did." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was ready to name. Sarah looked away first, cheeks flushing. Jacob carefully laid Emma in her makeshift cradle, a dresser drawer lined with blankets, and tucked her in. That night, lying in his bed while Sarah slept on the settee, Jacob stared at the ceiling. He could hear them breathing. 2 lives he was responsible for now, whether he'd planned it or not. The walls he'd built were cracking every day. A little more light got through. Every evening, another piece of his frozen heart thawed. It terrified him. After losing Mary, after losing his son, he'd sworn never to care that deeply again. Caring meant pain. Love meant loss. But Emma's trust, Sarah's smile, the way the cabin felt alive again, these things he couldn't ignore, didn't want to ignore. He was in danger of hoping, and hope was the most terrifying thing of all. The snowstorm hit 3 weeks after Christmas. Wind howled like wolves, piling drifts against the cabin walls. For 3 days, they were sealed inside together, a small world of firelight and warmth against the fury outside. Sarah found his mother's recipe book on the 2nd day, tucked on a high shelf. "May I?" she asked, holding it carefully. Jacob nodded. "Go ahead." She baked bread using the old recipes, filling the cabin with smells he hadn't known in years. Cinnamon, honey, yeast rising. The kitchen became hers in a way that felt natural, unforced. She moved through it like she'd always been there. Emma learned to sit up during those storm days. One moment she was toppling over. The next she was balanced and proud, babbling at her achievement. Sarah laughed with pure joy, and Jacob found himself laughing too. It had been so long since he'd laughed. On the 3rd night, Emma grew fussy, teething again, or maybe just tired of being cooped up. She wouldn't settle for Sarah, who'd been up with her the previous night and was exhausted. "Let me try," Jacob said. Sarah hesitated. then handed Emma over. I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with her. Nothing's wrong. She's just being a baby. Jacob stood, walked Emma in slow circles around the cabin. He hummed the only song he could remember, something his own mother had sung. No words. Just melody. Emma's crying faded to whimpers. Then silence. She laid her head on his shoulder, sighed deeply, relaxed into sleep. Her small body was warm and trusting against his chest. Her breath came steady and slow. Jacob stopped walking, stood still in the lamplight. This feeling, this fierce, protective tenderness, he'd thought had died with his son. But here it was again, alive and overwhelming. This baby girl who wasn't his, who'd come to him by chance and desperation, had somehow found her way into the locked chambers of his heart. When he looked up, Sarah was crying quietly. What is it? He whispered, not wanting to wake Emma. She trusts you. Sarah's voice broke. Emma doesn't trust people. After everything being left behind, the cold, strange faces everywhere, she stopped letting anyone but me hold her. Even kind strangers at the trading post. She'd scream. But you. She wiped her eyes. She knows. Children always know who's good. Jacob couldn't speak. His throat was too tight. He looked down at Emma, at her peaceful, sleeping face, her tiny hand curled against his shirt. He'd failed his own son, hadn't been able to save him. But maybe he could protect this one. Maybe he could be what Emma needed. She's easy to love, he finally said. Sarah's eyes met his, wide and dark in the firelight. Something passed between them, unspoken but powerful. Understanding, recognition, the dangerous beginning of something neither had planned. Sarah looked away first, flushed. I should... When the storm clears. I'll need to think about spring. The mountain passes will open in a few months. I should write to my sister. Let her know we're coming. The words hit Jacob like cold water. Coming. Future tense. Leaving. Right, he said. Of course. He laid Emma in her drawer cradle, tucked blankets around her small body. His hands felt empty after. Everything felt empty. That night. Jacob lay awake, listening to the storm rage. Sarah and Emma breathed quietly across the cabin. He thought about spring, about the passes opening, about them leaving, about this cabin returning to silence and solitude. He couldn't bear it. The realization was sudden and complete. He couldn't watch them walk away. These two lives had become necessary to him in 3 short weeks. Emma's laughter, Sarah's presence, the way the cabin felt alive again. But what could he offer? A rough cabin on isolated land. A man still haunted by grief. A life of hard work and harder winters. Sarah deserved better. Emma deserved better. They deserved Portland, a real family. Opportunities he couldn't provide. Jacob stared at the ceiling, wrestling with hope and fear. He wanted them to stay, wanted it with an intensity that terrified him. But wanting wasn't enough. He'd wanted his son to live too. Wanting changed nothing. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, warmth held. And in the space between what was and what could never be, Jacob Thornton felt his heart breaking all over again. Late January brought a cold snap so severe that ice formed on the inside of windows. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered. Sarah grew restless, stronger, thinking ahead. I've imposed on you too long, she said one morning while making coffee. Jacob looked up from the ledger where he'd been pretending to work. You haven't imposed. I have. Emma and I have taken your bed, your food, your time. When the weather breaks, we should go. Go where the passes won't open for 2 months at least. To town, then. I could find work, earn money for passage to Portland. What kind of work? Jacob kept his voice neutral. With a baby. Sarah's jaw set in that stubborn way he'd come to recognize. I'll find something. I always do. She began planning in earnest, mending her worn dress, organizing their few belongings, preparing for departure. Jacob helped without comment, even though every preparation felt like a small death. He hitched the wagon one morning to take them to town once the roads cleared. Sarah found him repairing the old cradle in the barn 2 days later. She stood in the doorway, watching him work. "What's that for?" she asked. "Cradle." He didn't look up, focused on sanding the wood smooth. "For Emma." Hope colored her voice. Jacob's hands stilled. He should say yes. Should tell her it was for Emma, that he wanted her to have it. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he shook his head. For the next family that might need it. The next family, not them. The words hung in the cold air like accusation. Sarah's face went blank. "Of course, that makes sense." She turned and left. Jacob heard her footsteps retreating, quick and hurt. He closed his eyes, cursed himself silently. He'd meant to be practical, to keep distance between them. Instead, he'd just wounded her. The warmth that had grown between them began to chill. Meals became awkward, conversations forced. Sarah threw herself into preparations, acting brisk and efficient. Jacob worked longer hours on the ranch, coming home after dark, leaving before dawn. Emma sensed the tension. She grew fretful, crying more than usual, not settling easily. Both adults tried to comfort her, but the unspoken pain between them made everything harder. One evening, Sarah spoke as she washed dishes. "I wrote to my sister. I'll post the letter in town. Let her know we'll arrive in early summer." "Good," Jacob said, though the word tasted like ash. "That's good. Thank you for everything. Jacob, truly, you saved our lives. I'll never forget your kindness." Past tense, as if they'd already gone. Jacob nodded, unable to speak. He stood abruptly, pulled on his coat. "I'll check the stock." Outside. The night was brutally cold. Stars blazed overhead, distant and uncaring. Jacob walked past the barn to the cottonwood tree where Mary and their son lay buried. The graves were marked with simple wooden crosses, weathered now by 5 winters. He knelt in the snow, breath smoking white. "I don't know what to do," he said quietly. "I want them to stay. God help me, Mary. I want them to stay so much it hurts. But what right do I have to ask? What can I give them? Except a hard life in the middle of nowhere. Emma deserves a real home, a real family. Sarah deserves a man who isn't broken." The wind answered with silence. "I loved you," Jacob continued, voice cracking. "I'll always love you. But they need more than I can give. So I'm letting them go. I'm doing the right thing." He sat in the frozen dark, alone with his dead and his living heartbreak. Inside the cabin, lamplight glowed warm. Sarah's shadow moved across the window, Emma in her arms. They looked like a painting, like everything he'd lost and couldn't have again. Later, lying in bed while Sarah slept on the settee, Jacob heard her whisper to Emma, "It was nice, though. Wasn't it pretending we belonged somewhere? Pretending we had a home?" She thought he was asleep, thought he couldn't hear, but every word cut him like a blade. Sarah wanted to stay. She'd been waiting for him to ask. Any fool that he was had pushed her away out of fear, out of the terrible belief that he didn't deserve another chance at happiness. Jacob stared at the ceiling, wide awake. Tomorrow they would leave for town. She'd post her letter, make plans to go to Portland, walk out of his life forever, unless he found the courage to stop her. Unless he finally opened the door he'd kept locked for 5 years, not the nursery door, but the door to his own heart. The question was whether he could. Morning came clear and cold. Sarah dressed Emma in her warmest clothes, gathered their belongings. Jacob hitched the wagon in silence, loaded it with their few things. The ride to town would take 2 hours. After that, Sarah would rent a room, find work, wait for spring. It was sensible, practical, the right decision. So why did it feel like dying? Jacob helped Sarah into the wagon seat, handed Emma up to her. The baby looked at him with wide eyes, sensing something wrong. She reached for him, made a small sound of distress. "It's all right, sweetheart," Sarah murmured, though her voice shook. "We're just going for a ride." Jacob climbed up, took the reins. The horses stamped, eager to move. He should urge them forward. Should get this over with. He couldn't. Emma began to cry. Not her usual fussy cry, but something heartbroken and inconsolable. She twisted in Sarah's arms, reaching desperately for Jacob, screaming now. "Emma, please," Sarah begged, trying to soothe her. "Baby, please." But Emma wouldn't stop. Her face turned red, tears streaming. She fought against Sarah's hold, arms outstretched toward Jacob in unmistakable need. Something in him shattered. Jacob took the baby, pulled her against his chest. Emma grabbed his coat with both tiny hands, buried her face in his shoulder, sobbed like her heart was breaking. Because it was. She didn't understand why they were leaving the only home she'd known since that terrible Christmas night. Sarah's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with her." "She knows," Jacob said quietly. "She knows we're saying goodbye." Sarah pressed her hands to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry. This was a mistake. We should go back. Calm her down." Emma's crying had weakened to exhausted whimpers. Then, suddenly, her body went hot against Jacob's chest. Too hot. "Sarah," he said sharply. "Feel her forehead." Sarah touched Emma's face and went white. "Oh God, she's burning up. Fever." Just like that. Fever. Whether from distress or coincidence didn't matter. Emma needed care, needed rest, needed the warmth of the cabin. Jacob turned the wagon around without a word. The decision was made. They drove back fast, Emma crying weakly against his shoulder. Sarah held them both, her own tears falling silent, back at the cabin. They worked together. Cool cloths on Emma's forehead, water coaxed between her lips, careful monitoring through the long day. The baby slept fitfully. Whimpering in her drawer cradle, Sarah refused to leave her side. Night fell. Emma's fever climbed higher. Sarah's composure finally broke. "Not again," she whispered, rocking back and forth. "Please, God, not again. Don't take her. Don't take my baby." Jacob pulled her close, held them both, Sarah and the fevered child. "She's strong. She'll be all right." "You don't know that. You can't know that." Sarah's voice was raw with terror. "I can't lose her. Jacob, she's all I have. She's everything." Through the night they kept vigil, taking turns with the cool cloths, monitoring each breath. Emma's fever raged, then held, then began slowly, agonizingly slowly to fall. By the darkest hour before dawn, Emma's forehead felt cooler. Her breathing steadied. Color returned to her cheeks. The crisis had passed. Sarah slumped against Jacob, exhausted beyond words. He held her, felt her body shake with relief and leftover fear. Emma slept peacefully between them, small and precious and alive. "I can't do this anymore," Sarah said. So quietly he almost missed it. "Can't do what? Pretend." She raised her head, met his eyes. Hers were red from crying, but clearer than he'd ever seen them. "I have nowhere to go, Jacob. My sister's last letter said times are hard. She can't take us in. I lied about Portland. I was going anyway because—" Her voice broke. because I couldn't stay where I wasn't wanted, where I was just charity, just burden. Jacob's heart stopped. Not wanted. You've been pulling away for days, building that cradle for the next family, making plans to take us to town. I thought, she stopped, swallowed hard. I thought you were ready for us to leave. Sarah, his voice came out rough, desperate. I've wanted nothing else but for you to stay, every day, every hour. I'm terrified. Last time I loved someone, God took them from me. I thought if I didn't ask, if I didn't hope, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much when you left. But I was wrong. It hurts anyway. Everything hurts. Sarah stared at him. You want us to stay. I want you to stay. I want Emma to stay. I want to wake up to her laughing and go to sleep hearing you breathe. I want to teach Emma to walk and watch her grow. I want to deserve you. But I don't know if I can. I'm just a broken rancher with more grief than sense. Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. We're broken too. All of us are. Maybe that's why we fit. Maybe we've both been too afraid to live. Jacob said. Dawn broke outside. Pale light touching the windows. Emma stirred, blinked awake. She looked at them both, Jacob and Sarah, close together, her safe between them. She smiled, a real smile, and reached with both tiny hands. Jacob took one hand. Sarah took the other. The three of them sat together as morning light filled the cabin, and for the first time in 5 years, Jacob Thornton felt something he'd thought was dead. He felt hope. The next days unfolded differently. Unspoken agreement, no one mentioned leaving. Sarah resumed her place in the cabin as if she'd always belonged there. Emma recovered fully, babbling and happy. Jacob found himself smiling without meaning to. One morning, he stopped outside the closed nursery door. He'd passed it 1,000 times in 5 years, never pausing. Now he stood there, hand on the knob, heart pounding. Sarah came up behind him quietly. You don't have to, she said softly. I think I do. Jacob looked at her. I'd like Emma to have it. If you'll both stay, really stay, not as guests, as family. Sarah's eyes filled. Jacob, let me finish. He turned to face her fully. I'm not good with words. I work better with my hands than my mouth. But I need to say this right. He took a breath, gathered courage. I want to be Emma's father, legally, before God and the law and anyone who asks. I want to adopt her, give her my name, raise her as mine, because she already feels like mine. Has since that first night. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling. And I want to be your husband. Jacob continued, voice rough with emotion. If you'll have a broken-down rancher who's forgotten how to do anything but work, who'll probably mess things up and say the wrong thing and be too scared sometimes, but who loves you, who wants to spend whatever years God gives us building a life together. He reached for her hand, held it carefully. I want to stop being alone. I want to be your husband and Emma's father. I want you both to be mine, and me to be yours. I want to open that door and fill the nursery with laughter again. I want... His voice cracked. I want a family. Please. Sarah's answer came through tears. Yes, to all of it. Yes. She threw her arms around him, and Jacob held her tight, his own eyes burning. Emma, playing nearby with her rattle, squealed with delight at seeing them embrace. Jacob pulled back, kept hold of Sarah's hand, and turned the nursery door handle. It opened with a soft click. Inside, dust motes danced in sudden light. Mary's rocking chair sat in the corner. The cradle he'd built waited beside it. Small clothes lined a shelf. The room held grief, yes, but also love, also hope, also the promise of new life. Emma should have this, Jacob said. But I'd like to keep Mary's chair, if that's all right. Of course. Sarah squeezed his hand. We honor who came before. That's how we move forward. They cleaned the nursery together that afternoon, opened windows to let in fresh air, washed everything carefully. Sarah hung Emma's few clothes beside the older ones. Jacob sanded and polished the cradle until it gleamed. Emma took her afternoon nap in it for the first time. She fit perfectly, smiled in her sleep. That evening, after Emma was settled, Jacob and Sarah sat by the fire. He pulled a small box from his pocket, his mother's wedding ring. Simple gold that had sat in a drawer for years. It's not much, he said, but it's honest. Like I want us to be. Sarah took the ring, slipped it on her finger. Perfect fit. When? She asked. Soon as the circuit preacher comes through. Could be a week, could be a month, but I want it legal. Want everyone to know you're my wife and Emma's my daughter? I want that too. Sarah leaned against him, and Jacob wrapped his arm around her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching fire shadows dance. I was so scared, Sarah admitted, of hoping, of believing we could have this. Me too. Jacob pressed his lips to her hair, but Emma was braver than both of us. She knew from the start. Sarah laughed softly. Children see what adults miss. They do. Jacob looked toward the nursery, where Emma slept peacefully. She saved me. You both did. I was just going through motions, waiting to die. Now I remember what living feels like. We saved each other. Sarah said, That's what family does. Family. The word settled warm and true in Jacob's chest. He'd lost one family to death and grief. But here, against all odds, in the frozen depths of winter, he'd found another, built it from rescue and kindness and the courage to hope one more time. Outside. Night fell soft and cold. Inside, warmth held. The nursery door stood open, lamplight spilling out. Emma's soft breathing carried through the cabin. Sarah's weight against his side felt like home. Jacob thought of that Christmas night, finding them frozen in the barn. How easily it could have ended differently. How close they'd all come to missing this moment. Welcome home, he said quietly. Sarah looked up at him, smiled. We've been home since Christmas. She was right. From that first night, they'd been building this step by step, day by day, until 3 broken people became one whole family. It was enough. More than enough, it was everything. Spring came late that year. But when it came glorious. The snow melted slowly, revealing green grass and early wildflowers. Birds returned, filling morning air with song. The world woke from winter's sleep, and with it, new life bloomed. 3 months after Christmas, the circuit preacher arrived. Jacob had sent word through the general store that a wedding was needed. The preacher came prepared, Bible in hand, blessing at the ready. Sarah wore a simple dress she'd sewn from fabric Jacob bought in town. She'd made it in secret, working by lamplight after he slept. Pale blue, modest, with wildflowers tucked in her dark hair. Emma wore a new dress, too white cotton with yellow ribbons. She sat on Sarah's hip throughout the ceremony, babbling happily, occasionally reaching for Jacob. 2 ranch hands served as witnesses. They stood in the cabin's main room, afternoon light streaming through clean windows. The preacher spoke the ancient words. Sarah and Jacob repeated their vows, voices steady and sure. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Jacob leaned in carefully, mindful of Emma between them. The kiss was gentle, sweet, a promise sealed. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said, smiling. "And I understand there's another matter." "Yes, sir." Jacob took papers from the table, adoption documents he'd had drawn up in town. "I'd like to legally adopt Emma as my daughter." The preacher reviewed the papers, nodded. "Sarah, you consent to this with all my heart," Sarah said, eyes shining. Then by the laws of Montana Territory, Emma Mitchell is now Emma Thornton, daughter of Jacob and Sarah Thornton. May God bless this family. Jacob signed. Sarah signed. The witnesses signed. It was official, legal, real. They celebrated with a simple meal the ranch hands helped prepare. Beef and potatoes, fresh bread, dried apple pie. Nothing fancy, but abundant. Everyone ate well, laughed easily. Emma banged her spoon on the table, delighted by the noise and attention. After the hands left, after the preacher rode away with payment and thanks, the new family sat together in the evening light. Sarah nursed Emma, who'd grown drowsy from excitement. Jacob sat beside them, arm around his wife's shoulders, watching his daughter's eyes drift closed. "Mama," Emma mumbled, half asleep. Sarah's breath caught. It was the first time Emma had said the word clearly. Jacob felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah whispered. "Mama's here." Emma's eyes opened briefly. "Found Jacob." "Duh," she said, testing the sound. Jacob had to swallow hard before he could speak. "That's right. Emma, I'm your da, and I'll be here, always." Emma smiled, content, and let sleep claim her. Sarah carried her to the nursery, laid her in the cradle that had waited so long for this purpose. She tucked blankets around the small body, kissed her forehead. Jacob stood in the doorway, watching. His wife, his daughter, his family. Sarah crossed to him, took his hand. "What are you thinking?" "That Christmas was late that year," he said, "but it came just in time." "For all of us?" Sarah leaned into him. "I keep thinking about that night. How close we came to missing this. If I'd chosen a different barn, if you'd checked your stock an hour later." "You didn't, and I didn't." Jacob held her close. "We found each other exactly when we needed to." They stood together in the doorway, Emma sleeping peacefully behind them. Through the open window, evening sounds drifted in crickets singing, wind in the cottonwood tree, the distant call of a night bird. The ranch spread around them, green and alive after winter's death, fences mended, garden planted, animals thriving. Everything tended with care by hands that had remembered purpose. Later, they sat on the porch watching stars emerge. Sarah's head rested on Jacob's shoulder. Inside, Emma slept safe and warm. Tomorrow would bring work. There was always work on a ranch. But tonight was for peace, for gratitude, for recognition of blessings that came disguised as disaster. "Do you think Mary would approve?" Sarah asked quietly. Jacob had thought about this often. "I think she'd be happy I'm not alone anymore. That I found love again. That Emma has a father and you have a home." He paused. "She always said I had too much heart to waste it on being alone." She was right. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for accepting it, broken as it was. We're all broken." Sarah looked up at the stars. "But broken things can be mended, especially when you have help." Jacob kissed the top of her head, breathed in the scent of her hair. Behind them, through the open door, lamplight spilled golden onto the porch. Inside, the cabin glowed with warmth and life. The nursery door stood open, Emma's soft breathing just audible. A year ago, Jacob had been alone, empty, going through motions of living without really being alive. The cabin had been dark except for one lamp, silent except for his own breathing, cold despite the fire. Now light filled every room. Laughter echoed daily. Love had returned to spaces that had held only grief. All because of one frozen Christmas night, one desperate woman, one innocent baby, one man who'd found the courage to open his door and his heart one more time. Jacob looked out across his land, at the mountains dark against the star-filled sky. Somewhere beyond those peaks was the wagon train that had abandoned Sarah, the people who'd left her and Emma to die. They'd probably forgotten all about the sick woman and her baby. But Jacob would remember. every day, every moment. He'd remember that sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms, that sometimes family wasn't born, it was chosen, that sometimes the best gifts arrived wrapped in desperation and snow. Sarah stirred against him. Should we go in a minute? Jacob wanted to hold this moment. The peace of it. The absolute rightness of sitting on his porch with his wife under the stars, their daughter sleeping safely inside. This was what he'd built the cabin for, all those years ago. This was what he'd imagined when he and Mary first claimed this land. Not loneliness, not grief, but this family, love, home. It had just taken the long way around to arrive, finally. They went inside. Jacob banked the fire while Sarah checked Emma one last time. They moved together through the cabin, putting things right for morning, comfortable in the domestic ritual. In their bedroom, the room that had been Jacob's alone for so long, Sarah unpinned her hair, let it fall dark and long down her back. Jacob watched, marveling that this was real, that she was his wife, that Emma was his daughter, that his life, empty and hollow for 5 years, was full again. They lay down together in the dark, through the wall. Emma's breathing carried soft and steady. Outside, the spring night held its peace. Inside, 3 hearts beat in time, family rhythms, as old as time and new as morning. Jacob's last thought before sleep claimed him was of lantern light in the barn, revealing 2 frozen figures in the hay. He'd climbed that ladder thinking he'd find death. Instead, he'd found life. His life. Their life. Beginning again on a Christmas night that changed everything. Sarah's hand found his in the dark, held tight. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Jacob answered. "Both of you. Forever." It was a promise. A vow. A declaration of faith in second chances and new beginnings. And as sleep finally came, Jacob Thornton, husband, father, rancher, man redeemed, smiled. The long winter was over. Spring had come at last, and with it, hope bloomed eternal.